And this will be the first one that we cover of those basic institutions, the three branches of government that we have in our government system. And I would imagine many of you are aware of this going back to your 8th grade civics class to talk about the three branches of government. The lawmaking branch of government, Chapter 12, Congress. And again, we've talked about how these chapters start to just blend in together and kind of intertwine. So here we're looking at going back to Chapter 2. Remember the Connecticut Compromise. So we see this still part of our system today, that compromise between the large state plan and the small state plan. And we see that reflected in the bicameral system that we have for Congress. So in the New Jersey plan, the small state plan, you have the Senate, 2 senators per state, equal representation. And in the House of Representatives, the Virginia plan, the large state plan, you have in this case an uneven amount of representation because the states don't have the same sizes. And so you have some considerable differences there in the overall body of representatives from one state to the next. Now, keep in mind that when the districts are drawn and you have redistricting that takes place every 10 years based on the census, that you have to have a fairly even number of people, over 700,000 now, and but the districts can be drawn in some very unique ways, perhaps. There's at least an argument made that there's geographic integrity for the 5 districts that we see here in Oklahoma. But we can see that there's some considerable disparity in sizes, and that's understandable when you see the vast differences of the 2 major urban areas in Oklahoma compared to the rural areas of the state. But there you can see, I would imagine most of you taking this class, but think about that if you're from Oklahoma, which one of those districts would be your congressional district? I would think that most of you are in District 2. Look at Congress. One of the issues I think to consider about Congress is the power of the incumbent. And so we can see the strategy of the 2 parties, how that can be different, or how the emphasis would be on those open seats where there is no incumbent. We know that an incumbent is the one who already holds the position, continues to hold it. So we can see a lot of benefits of the 2 parties to try to make sure that they have incumbents. And there is no term limit, so there's a lot of success for those who continue to stay in the House and the Senate. And so it's an incredible re-election success rate by and large in most elections. So even in times in which there's been some considerable negativity towards Congress, you still have most incumbents that get reelected, such as the 2010 midterm election. Here we are, midterm election 2018. The popularity of Congress is not very great, but most members of Congress, if they run for reelection, they're going to get reelected. Let's think of some reasons why that might be the case. We talked about this with Chapter 10, looking at the money that's involved in campaigns. We actually brought this up with Chapter 11 as well in interest groups. But you have these organizations, look these over in your text, political action committees, 527 committees that raise money. And when they do raise money, we can see how it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They have a tendency to give most of their money to incumbents. Incumbents get reelected, and why they get reelected is they get most of the money. So it just all plays in together. But indeed, that is the case, and from the political action committee's point of view, it makes sense to give that money to the candidate that they think is most likely to win, and that's going to be the incumbent. Advantages such as casework, helping the constituents back home, doing all kinds of things, perhaps just public relations, as it's suggested here in this picture, getting family's picture of some certificate that a student has won. But it can be issues such as, helping out people financially, perhaps if they need assistance with Social Security or Medicare. So there we can see how it can be very important. And the incumbent can do that, the challenger can't. There's worked into the budget that there's a certain amount of money for each member of Congress that they can mail out letters stamp free, and they just put their signature or some stamp of their signature on the mailing, and they mail it out. And this is certainly something that can be advantageous for them in giving out this information. Now, they need to keep their constituencies involved and informed, and it's not supposed to be campaign literature, but studies have proven that in even-numbered years, the amount of franking privileges does go up. And this becomes a very subjective way of determining how money is being spent. But you'll hear the phrase pork barrel politics, pork barrel spending. And one of the ways to describe that is a special project for a particular locale. So it's helping some areas with government money. Is it a waste of money? Well, it might be, but it might also be something that actually can be very helpful. And it could also certainly be a situation where the district getting the money does not find it to be wasteful. So how do you make that determination that is in fact wasteful spending? But it can certainly help the incumbent. And again, it's something that the incumbent can do, the challenger cannot. You can see that there are certain individuals within Congress that have a considerable amount of power. Arguably, the most powerful individual in Congress would be the Speaker of the House. And here's some of the ways of looking at the power of the Speaker. So I won't read that out. You might want to pause and just look at the different powers that are given there to the Speaker. The Speaker also, as we can see there, is next in line to the President after the Vice President. So we are living in a situation in which we need to know who is President at any given time. The idea that you could go a few hours without somebody being President is just not the world that we live in, and we haven't lived in that world for several decades now, as we can see with the Succession Act. The immediacy of warfare and the overwhelming power of warfare, and of course I'm speaking about nuclear weapons, means that there needs to be someone there to make just a tremendous decision that might have to happen. And so after the President and the Vice President, we can see it goes to the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and then the President pro tempore. And on down the list of some other individuals. We don't list all of them here, but the Cabinet, and these are the different positions of the Cabinet. So after the President pro tempore, we go back to the Cabinet to pick these individuals. Who would be in line to be President? Now, as I mentioned here, and you just think to yourself, does this really solve a lot of problems? If you found out tomorrow, after a dreadful evening, let's say, and who knows what exactly would have taken place, that the Secretary of Agriculture is the top individual in the succession who is left alive. No one else ahead of that individual is still able to serve as president. And so now the Secretary of Agriculture is president. I doubt if very many people are going to just be comfortable that the succession has taken place. There's going to have to be some questions raised and answered. What exactly took place? But that is the situation and how you use the Succession Act. So this is Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah. He is the senior member of the majority party in the U.S. Senate. He's a Republican from Utah. They have the majority, and so it's not a position that he campaigns for. He's been there longer than anyone else, and so he now serves as the President pro tempore. I just throw this out here. If you've been looking over my lectures online, I give some suggestions to popular culture, or at least somewhat recent popular culture, that can really illustrate an issue, and this is a fantastic movie named Dr. Strangelove, and it's worth watching if you get the opportunity, and it just deals with, in a dark, humorous sort of way, the possibility of just stumbling into a nuclear war and the reality that we are roughly 30 minutes away from a nuclear holocaust at any given time. It's somewhat dreadful to think about that, but that is a reality. And so this movie, again, in a funny way, helps to show us what that really means, or what it could mean. And this is our Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. He's a Republican from Wisconsin. So we look at the power here of these different individuals. The person who would run the majority party and really their caucus meeting, when they would just discuss strategies and plans, would be the majority leader, and that's Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California. The majority whip, we'll talk about the whips here in just a moment. This is an individual who is to enforce party discipline. Steve Scalise, Republican from Louisiana. Minority leader is Nancy Pelosi from California, a Democrat. And Steny Hoyer is the minority whip, Democrat from Maryland. So the power of the whips, some of the things that the whips might be able to do to enforce party discipline. So you try to get the votes for your party to pass some legislation or to resist legislation. And in that process, what you might do then is try to ensure, give someone either positive or negative reinforcement, whatever you think it might work. Give them funds for a campaign, take funds away, put them on a powerful standing committee, take them off a powerful standing committee, help approve legislation that they're sponsoring, prevent legislation that they are sponsoring from getting on the floor and to be voted. So those are some of the things that can happen for the whips and how they can use that positive or negative reinforcement. So there we can see some of the ways of doing that. Perhaps the individual member of Congress is negotiating for a better deal. Let's say that that's what they're hoping for. So how would they go about doing that? And these are some of the things that they might try to campaign for. Well, I got a bill that I would like to be passed, and will you vote for it? And will you put that up on the floor? Those kinds of issues. And that's referred to as log rolling. You vote for my bill, I'll vote for your bill. And again, on those carrots and sticks, there you go. You want to be on a very powerful standing committee. Look over your text. It has some excellent graphs that are diagrams that show the power of the standing committees and how some standing committees are more important than others, or at least can give an individual member of Congress more power. Budget committee, Ways and Means committee, the tax writing committee, the appropriations committee, the armed services committee. Those can be some committees that members of Congress would like to be on and give them individually more influence, but also help their districts as well. Well, you could also then turn that around if you're the whip and at least suggest that you're not going to be on one of those committees, or you're going to be removed from one of those committees if you don't vote for a particular bill. So there we can see carrot or stick or positive negative reinforcement strategies. Here we have some of those powerful committees. Be sure and look that over. We can see there the tax writing committee. We can see how powerful that can be by just putting together legislation for a tax increase or a tax cut. And then how money is spent, how that tax collected money is being spent, the appropriations committee. What rules take place on the debates, for example. There we can see the power in the House Rules Committee. That does not take place in the Senate. This may not have that much impact if individual members of Congress are raising their own money to run for re-election, but you could look at this as a pretty powerful tool that the whips could use. We'll support you for re-election, or we won't support you. you've got to think that this doesn't happen very often, because both parties would not want to see fewer members in their overall representation. So to actually go after an incumbent and say we're going to try to make sure that you're defeated would be a risky strategy, and would be something in which there must be some overwhelming animosity between the leadership and that individual member of the House or Senate. Well, look at the Senate. This is where we see a bit of a crossover going on here from the legislative branch to the executive branch. Mike Pence from Indiana, the vice president, is the presiding officer of the Senate. He would only vote if there was a tie on a particular bill. So the person who would run the Senate is the majority leader, and this is Mitch McConnell from Kentucky. The majority whip would have similar responsibilities as the majority whip in the House, John Cornyn from Texas. Here we have Chuck Schumer from New York, and he is of the Democratic Party, and he is the minority leader, and have the same responsibilities as the House minority leader. Dick Durbin from Illinois is the Senate minority whip, and would have that same type of responsibility to ensure discipline within the party, within the Senate. Look over the diagram that shows how a bill becomes a law, and you'll see this on page 481. I think some of the big issues to really focus on here would be the power of the committees and subcommittees, where the markup takes place, the precise language of a bill. And there you also have the case of working out two separate bills, and that you come up with one bill to be voted on from the two houses. The conference committee then is that where you have that one bill and vote on that. So you'll see all of that when you look over that diagram. There are some differences within the House and the Senate. And so here we can see that it's a stricter process in the rules, the rules within the House. Makes sense that that would be the case. I mean, there's far more members of the House than there are the Senate. The Senate does have opportunities, although this is being reduced. The opportunities to have a filibuster to delay the passage of a bill, and that's still being worked out within the Senate. To continue to add on amendments to a bill, amendments that are non-germane to a bill, that's a rider, and that does take place and can certainly clog up the legislation in the Senate. So again, here's that phenomenon of log rolling, vote trading. You vote for a bill, and then I'll vote for this other bill, that kind of trade-off. When we think of the factors of why a member of Congress would vote the way they do, I mean, fairly consistently, we do see that it's the folks back home, the constituents, and their fellow members of Congress that have that influence on how they're going to vote. And so this says a lot about the relationships within Congress, especially among the two parties, and voting with colleagues of your party. And that tends to be the case in a lot of situations. So here we can see part of the motivation of why a member of Congress would vote the way he or she would. And would it be based upon doing what one thinks is best for the constituency, or what they think the constituency wants, or is it based on one's own conscience? And that's, I think, interesting to go beyond just studying this issue and considering what happens here. Is to think about from your own perspective what type of representative and you would want, and how you would want that individual to vote. Would you want them to vote according to his own conscience, or would you want that representative to vote according to what she thinks the constituency wants? And so it's a different set of motivations there for sure, and a different expectation for the legislator in that case. All right, that's what we have for Congress, and we'll be shifting our attention then to the presidency in the next recorded lecture.